The young and the restless spoilers shock as dawn's pale light crept across the cold concrete walls of Genoa City's detention center. Martin Spencer lay in his cell on the narrow cot, eyes open, mind racing. The previous night's events played on a loop behind his eyelids, the hurried scrawl of Phyllis's testimony, Sharon's tearful accusations, Chance's vow to see justice done. They had finally gotten him locked up, at least for a little while. But Martin was never one to accept defeat. He was a predator, not prey, and this cell was nothing more than a temporary inconvenience. He rose from the cot and approached the heavy steel door, its bars casting long shadows on the floor. He ran his fingertips over the lock mechanism, feeling the slight give of a worn tumbler. The guard rotations were predictable, lights out at 10 p.m., one patrol at midnight, another at 3 a.m., and the first official shift change at 6. Martin had observed it all. Last night, during the 3 a.m. check, he'd caught a glimpse of the guard's master key ring, hanging loosely on a nail by the guard's desk, a careless oversight. By the time the lights flicked off, Martin had fashioned a makeshift pick from a thin sliver of metal he'd pried off the underside of the toilet's plumbing fixture. He'd studied the lock's inner workings in the dim glow of the corridor lamp, memorized every click and subtle resistance. His heart had thumped in his chest like a war drum, but his hands were steady, controlled. Within minutes, the lock gave way with a soft snap. He stepped into the corridor, sliding the door closed behind him. The prison was eerily silent, an advantage he intended to exploit. He crept down the hall, passing empty cells and flickering fluorescent lights. At the end of the wing, he found the maintenance closet he had scouted earlier. Inside lay uniforms and a mop bucket, a single janitor's cart. Martin slipped into a stained, ill-fitting jumpsuit, grabbed a mop handle for leverage, and blended into the shadows. Moments later, he emerged into the service tunnel that ran beneath the facility. He navigated by memory, turned left at the water shut-off valve, right past the electrical substation, then climbed the ladder that led to the outside courtyard. Within 20 minutes, he had vaulted the low perimeter fence and melted into the pre-dawn gloom. By 5:30 a.m., Martin was back on Genoa City streets, breathing in freedom like a drug. He paused only to change clothes in an abandoned alleyway, then activated his burner phone. His lips curved into a thin, malicious smile. Phyllis and Sharon had celebrated all night, convinced he would never see daylight again. They had no idea how close they had come to sealing their own fate. Meanwhile, at Sharon's house, morning sunlight streamed through the living room windows. Sharon and Phyllis sat side by side on the sofa, champagne flutes in hand, toasting the downfall of Martin Spencer. Chance's triumphant grin hovered in the photographs on the mantelpiece, a reminder of justice served. "It's finally over," Phyllis said, her voice bright with relief. She drained the last drop of champagne. "We can breathe again." Sharon nodded, but her smile was tinged with lingering anxiety. "I know. But it still feels surreal." They laughed lightly, clinking glasses again, unaware that the man they despised most was already closing in on them. Back on the streets, Martin dialed a number he had memorized months ago, an untraceable line to a fixer he had once used for discreet arrangements. "He's out," Martin hissed when the call connected. "I need everything ready." Surveillance on Phyllis Abbott's home, Sharon Collins's schedule. "No mistakes this time." "Yes, sir," the voice replied, clipped and professional. "We'll have operatives in place by midday." Martin ended the call and melted into the city's early bustle, a silent specter hunting his prey. Phyllis's morning began with the usual routine: coffee, reading the local paper, and a call to her therapist. But when she glanced at her phone and saw an unknown number, her heart fluttered with unease. She considered ignoring it, but something compelled her to answer. "Phyllis Abbott," she said, her tone cautious. A low, familiar voice replied, "Congratulations on sending me to jail. Enjoy your freedom while it lasts." The line went dead. Phyllis's hand trembled around the coffee mug. She looked at Sharon, whose expression mirrored her own alarm. "What was that?" Sharon asked, setting down her glass. Phyllis swallowed. I don't know. It was someone who sounded like Martin. Sharon's eyes widened. He's in prison. But he was released, Phyllis whispered, the color draining from her face. He said he was coming for us. The two women exchanged a terrified glance. The champagne celebration was instantly forgotten, replaced by a cold, sinking dread. Jack and Diane were summoned to the police station later that morning. Detective Martinez's office was tense, files spread across the desk. We have confirmation, Martinez said without preamble. Martin Spencer escaped custody at 3:14 a.m. No sign of forced entry at the jail, he slipped out using improvised tools. We're treating him as extremely dangerous. She slid a surveillance still across the desk, a grainy image of Martin, in a janitor's uniform, stepping into an alleyway. Jack's jaw clenched. He's coming for Phyllis and Sharon. Martinez nodded gravely. We've alerted them, but we need to get them into protective custody. And we need your help, both of you, because he might expect them to flee to familiar places. He knows their routines. Diane's eyes filled with tears, tears of fear this time, not sorrow. We have to get them somewhere safe, she said, voice trembling. Now. Jack stood, determination etched into every line of his face. We will. Let's move. As midday approached, Martin's operatives took their positions. One parked a van down the street from Sharon's house, another staked out Phyllis's favorite cafe. Martin himself slipped into a black sedan, face hidden behind sunglasses, watching the city map on his phone. Every second that ticked by narrowed the window of opportunity he had to strike before the police closed in. His plan was ruthless in its simplicity: terrorize Phyllis and Sharon into silence, force them back into his control, or eliminate them if they resisted. He imagined their panic, the look of betrayal when they realized how deeply he'd infiltrated their lives. The thought sent a thrill through him. Inside Sharon's home, the phone rang again. This time it was Detective Martinez. Miss Collins, this is Detective Martinez. You need to evacuate your residence immediately. There's reason to believe Martin Spencer is headed your way. Sharon's hand flew to her mouth. What do we do? We've arranged a safe house, Martinez said. Jack Abbott and Diane Jenkins will escort you there. Leave everything, just get out now. Phyllis appeared at the doorway, equally pale. We're coming with you, she said, steeling herself. Moments later, Jack and Diane arrived, their faces masks of resolve. They ushered the two women into the car and sped off, sirens blaring to clear the way. On the outskirts of town, in a secluded country house owned by an old friend of Jack's, the four took refuge. The house sat behind tall hedges, hidden from prying eyes. Inside, Sharon paced the living room, while Phyllis sank into an armchair, trembling. Jack locked the doors and windows, checking each one with methodical care. Diane stood beside him, her hand on his arm. They'll find us, Sharon whispered, fear and exhaustion in her voice. Jack turned to her, eyes fierce. Not if we're smart. We'll rotate watch. We have the phone lines on call, and Detective Martinez has officers stationed a mile away. We'll protect you. Phyllis closed her eyes, drawing in a shaky breath. I never thought it would come to this. I thought putting him away would be the end. Diane knelt beside her friend, brushing a strand of hair from her face. It's not over yet, she said softly. But you're not alone. We're here, for both of you. Meanwhile, Martin watched from a safe distance, his phone pressed to his ear. They're gone, his operative reported. They evacuated to a rural location. We've lost sight. Martin's lips curled into a cold smile. Then we wait, he said. And when they least expect it, we remind them who holds the power. He hung up, eyes glittering with malicious anticipation. The game had entered its most dangerous phase. Phyllis and Sharon were off the grid, under guard, but Martin's reach was long and his patience infinite. As night fell once more over Genoa City, the two sides braced for the inevitable clash. In the silent country house, Jack and Diane kept watch, hearts heavy but determined. In the shadows, Martin plotted his next move, certain that soon he would have his revenge. And somewhere in between, Tracy lay recovering, unaware of just how close she had come to a far darker fate, and how the man who nearly destroyed her was now on the warpath against those she loved. The battle lines were drawn, and no one could say who would emerge victorious when the next move was made. Phyllis Abbott sat alone in the quiet of her study, the late afternoon light slanting through the blinds and casting narrow bands of shadow across the carpet. In her hands she held a crystal tumbler of scotch, half full, but she hadn't tasted it in hours. Her mind was a whirlpool of thoughts, each one tugging her toward a different shore of possibility and dread. All around her, the world seemed to be moving on. Sharon was safe, tucked away under police protection in that remote country house. Jack and Diane were coordinating security details, checking in hourly, making sure that no one, not even a stray news crew, could find Phyllis. And yet Phyllis felt neither relief nor closure. She had helped send Martin Spencer to jail, she had watched him slip through bars and vanish back into the night, she had felt the cold fear of his voice on the phone, promising retribution. But none of it felt final. She turned the glass in her hand, listening to the faint click of ice against crystal. Martin was still alive, somewhere out there. The possibility of his death had never been more real. Had the guards at the detention center been a fraction more alert, had the locks been maintained properly, he might have stayed locked away forever. And in that moment, Phyllis found herself wondering, would she have felt better if Martin had died in that escape attempt? Would that have brought her the peace she so desperately craved? On the one hand, she knew that vengeance, cold, permanent vengeance, could feel intoxicating. The thought of Martin's final, irrevocable defeat held a dark allure. No more threats, no more nightmares, no more phone calls in the dead of night. If he were dead, she would never again wonder if he was watching her, plotting her demise, or waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The man who had tormented her, manipulated her, threatened her very existence would be gone, forever. Yet on the other hand, Phyllis recoiled at the idea of taking a life, even the life of someone as monstrous as Martin Spencer. She had always prided herself on her moral compass, however warped it might sometimes have seemed. She had outwitted him, used the law to hold him accountable, and in doing so, she had risen above the chaos he had sown. If she were to actively wish for his death, if she were to orchestrate it herself, wouldn't that make her no better than him? Wouldn't that reduce her to the same level of cold calculation and cruelty? She remembered the look in Sharon's eyes when they first realized Martin had escaped. Terror, yes, but also a resolute determination that no matter what, they would fight back. Sharon had never once suggested killing Martin. Her instinct was always to survive, to protect, to endure. That was the Abbott way, too. Fierce loyalty, unyielding grit, and a willingness to suffer rather than strike down an enemy. Still, Phyllis felt the dark ember of temptation flicker in her chest. She closed her eyes and imagined a final confrontation, Martin, cornered in an abandoned warehouse, with no escape. The rain pounding on the roof, thunder rolling overhead, the two of them facing off in a battle of wills. And then, one bullet, one slip, one fatal blow. Martin's body crumpling to the ground, and Phyllis standing over him, her chest heaving with adrenaline and relief. A terrible, triumphant moment of release. But the vision left her hollow. The aftermath would be chaos, police investigations, news headlines, the possibility of legal repercussions. And even if she never faced charges, the weight of taking a life would follow her forever. Could she live with that? Could she ever forgive herself? Her thoughts turned to the future, her future. She had hoped, after Martin's incarceration, that she could return to some semblance of normalcy. That she and Nick could rebuild their fragile relationship, that she could find joy in her work again, that she could finally let go of the constant fear that had shadowed her for months. But now, with Martin still at large, every plan felt provisional, every dream contingent on his ultimate defeat. Phyllis set the glass down and rose, pacing the length of the room. She pulled open a drawer in her desk and retrieved a stack of photographs, images of happier times. Her wedding to Nick, her first triumph as head of Jabot, summer afternoons with her daughter Summer. She let her fingers trace the glossy surfaces, seeking comfort in memories. Could those days return? Could she reclaim the lightness she once felt? She realized that her own peace would remain elusive until Martin was no longer a threat. Whether he was dead or locked away in a fortress of steel, she needed certainty. And that certainty would only come with finality. The law had given her a temporary victory, but the law had failed to contain him. She had to decide, was she willing to let the system correct its mistakes, or would she take matters into her own hands? A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Jack entered, his face drawn but resolute. He closed the door behind him and approached the desk. "Phyllis," he said gently. "How are you holding up?" She looked up, eyes red-rimmed. "I don't know, Jack. Every time I think we're safe, I realize how fragile it all is." He nodded, taking the chair opposite her. "I know. Detective Martinez is doing everything she can, but until we find him, the danger remains." She sighed. "I keep asking myself if it would have been better if he'd never made it out of that cell. If I'd never allowed myself to hope that the law was enough." Jack's expression was tender but firm. "I understand the thought crosses your mind. But you didn't kill him, Phyllis. You did the right thing by bringing him to justice. If he dies now, it won't be your doing." She pressed her hands to her temples. "But will I ever feel like it's over? Can I ever move on unless I know he's truly gone?" Jack leaned forward. "You'll move on when you decide to stop giving him power over your life. Whether he lives or dies, the real prison is the fear you carry. You have to reclaim your life, Phyllis, on your terms." She closed her eyes, absorbing his words. He was right, of course. She could not let Martin's existence dictate her every breath. Yet the path forward felt uncertain, shadowed by the possibility of his return. When she opened her eyes, a new resolve gleamed within them. "Then I need a plan," she said. "Not just to protect myself, but to protect everyone I love. And I need to believe that one day, I can put this behind me, even if he's still out there." Jack stood and extended his hand. "Then let's make that plan together." As they joined forces to fortify her future, Phyllis felt a tentative hope bloom within her. The question of Martin's fate, whether he would live to see another day or die in some dramatic reckoning, remained unresolved. But in that moment, she realized that her own destiny was not bound to his. She could choose courage over fear, action over paralysis, and love over vengeance. And perhaps, one day, she would look back on this chapter of her life not as a time of terror, but as the crucible that forged her strength. And the moment she finally reclaimed her freedom.